Hello, and welcome to our webcast about the proportionality mechanisms embedded in the ISSB standards. The objective of our session is to provide an understanding of what these proportionality mechanisms are and how to apply them. The International Sustainability Standards Board's objective is to develop standards that provide a truly global baseline of sustainability-related financial disclosures. And to do that, they need to be capable of being applied by companies with various levels of capabilities and preparedness in a variety of markets around the world. As such, the proportionality mechanisms that we will explain in this webcast were included in the ISSB standards to ensure that our standards are fit for purpose and suited to every jurisdiction and every company, including the very important smaller entities that serve as part of the global supply chains of significantly larger entities. My name is Ndidi Noli-Adosian, and I am an ISSB member, joined by my colleague Martine Beaulieu, who is on the ISSB's technical staff.
Thanks, Ndidi. A few notes before we get started. You can find the ISSB standards on our website, which includes the appendices as well as the basis for conclusion and the accompanying guidance. Other webcasts and materials explaining and illustrating IFRS S1 and IFRS S2 can also be found on our website. And finally, the views expressed in this webcast are those of the presenters. They're not necessarily the views of the ISSB or the IFRS Foundation.
So, why were the proportionality mechanisms introduced? Let's start our webcast by providing some background on why the proportionality mechanisms in the ISSB standards were introduced and what they were designed to do. Our consultation feedback on the IFRS Standards S1 and IFRS S2 exposure drafts highlighted application challenges that might prevent some companies from complying fully with the proposals. We were given a very strong message that we needed to make sure that the standards were fit for use, even by smaller companies, and those in developing economies especially, not just the largest, most well-resourced companies in developed economies. The potential challenges highlighted including 1, resource constraints, noticed especially that the costs of investing in and operating the systems and processes necessary for applying the requirements are proportionately higher for some companies, especially small and medium-sized entities. Secondly, data availability, noting that high-quality external data is less available in some markets, industries, and parts of the value chain. And finally, specialist availability, noting that skills or expertise might be less available to some companies and in some markets. So, to respond to these proportionality challenges, the ISSB decided to add proportionality mechanisms in S1 and S2 that accommodate for the range of capabilities and levels of preparedness around the world to assist those companies that might otherwise find it difficult to comply with the standards. These proportionality mechanisms that we will speak about today are specifically designed and intended to reduce the cost and ease the burden of disclosure. So, how are the proportionality mechanisms designed to be used? Firstly, they're provided to help companies with the application of specific requirements in the standards where the ISSB felt the greatest challenges would exist. They are not applicable to all requirements in the standards. We will cover which requirements they apply to as part of the webcast. Secondly, they do not exempt companies from providing disclosures, nor do they introduce new requirements. Rather, they support companies applying the requirements either by adjusting the information a company needs to gather to provide disclosures and the effort required in doing so, or modifying the approach required by a company to prepare the disclosures, or by adjusting the information that is required to be disclosed.
It's important to note that the ISSB introduced a range of mechanisms to support the application of the ISSB standards. This webcast focuses only on the proportionality mechanism, but this slide highlights that these are not the only mechanism to support companies, especially when first applying our standard. The proportionality mechanism we'll focus on today are in the left column in blue, and that is the use of all reasonable and supportable information that is available to the company at the reporting date without undue cost or effort. Second one is the provision of disclosures based on approaches commensurate with the skills, capabilities, and resources that are available to the company. For ease in this webcast, we use the shorter form, all reasonable and supportable information without undue cost or effort to refer to the first mechanism. In addition to these proportionality mechanism, the other mechanism and guidance that support the application of the ISSB standards include the transition relief. These are designed to help companies get started using our standards. These are relief from applying specific requirements in the first year that a company applies the ISSB standards. For example, in the first year, IFRS S1 provides relief from reporting its sustainability-related financial disclosures at the same time it publishes its related financial statement. Instead, it allows the sustainability-related annual information to be provided with the subsequent interim financial statement. Another example of transition relief is in IFRS S2, where it relieves companies from disclosing their Scope 3 GHG emission. These transition reliefs may be extended by jurisdiction, especially for smaller entities. They differ from proportionality mechanism. Transition reliefs generally relieve company from a specific disclosure for a period of time. This contrasts to proportionality mechanisms that are not time-bound. Other mechanisms, these are also included in the standards to support application. For example, there is relief from the provision of quantitative information related to current and anticipated financial effect if specific conditions are met, such as being unable to separately identify the effect of a particular climate-related risk. In addition, guidance is provided to aid understanding of the standards, such as publication of educational material, such as this webcast. These other mechanisms are not the focus of this session today, but the key message here is that there are other mechanisms and guidance that support application of the standards, in addition to the proportionality mechanism we'll talk about today. So what will this webcast cover? Firstly, what are the proportionality mechanism? Secondly, which requirement in the standards the proportionality mechanism applied to? And finally, how to apply the proportionality mechanism. What you should take away from this session is an understanding of the proportionality mechanism, how they are used in ISSB standard, and how to apply them to specific disclosure requirements.
Now, let's provide an overview of the two proportionality mechanisms. The first proportionality mechanism is focused on the type of information that a company is required to use in preparing disclosures. In particular circumstances, in the standards, companies are asked to use all reasonable and supportable information that is available to the company at the reporting date without undue cost or effort. This requirement helps companies because it establishes parameters for identifying the type of information that is reasonably available and the effort required to prepare the disclosures. For example, stating this helps by confirming that a company need not carry out an exhaustive search to obtain information for specific disclosures. This mechanism has been used in ISSB standards in areas that might involve high levels of judgment or uncertainty. This can be helpful for all companies, but particularly for those that have less experience in sustainability reporting, that are less well-resourced, or are operating in environments where data availability is more challenging. As we noted upfront, the proportionality mechanism does not relieve a company from disclosing information. Rather, it supports application by requiring the disclosure to be prepared with information that is reasonable and supportable, but is also available to it without undue cost or effort at the reporting date, based on its circumstances. It is important to note that companies must provide disclosures, even if informed by a more restricted set of information. So these mechanisms do not allow companies to argue that they cannot provide a disclosure on the basis that there is no reasonable and supportable information available without undue cost and effort. This is because the information was determined by the ISSB to be useful to primary users. Now, the second proportionality mechanism is focused on application of requirements in a manner that is proportionate to an entity's circumstances as it relates to skills, capabilities, and resources. The mechanism is used in two ways in the standards. Firstly, in relation to the approach an entity takes in applying specific requirements, that is, requiring that the approach is commensurate with the skills, capabilities, and resources that are available to the company. Secondly, in relation to specific requirements adjusting the disclosure that a company is required to provide if the company does not have the skills, capabilities, or resources to provide particular information. These mechanisms are designed to support companies in applying requirements in a way that is proportionate to their circumstances, and as a result, help companies apply specific requirements in the standards that they would otherwise find challenging to comply with. Requirements in which the proportionality mechanisms are included. Over to you, Martine.
Thank you, NDD. Before explaining how the proportionality mechanism are applied, it's important to understand which requirement the proportionality mechanism applied to. As can be seen in the table on the slide, the first mechanism on the left, all reasonable and supportable information available without undue cost or effort, applies in IFRS S1 to a number of requirements, including identifying the sustainability-related risk and opportunities that could reasonably be expected to affect the company's prospect. It applies in determining the scope of the company's value chain and in preparing disclosures about the anticipated financial effect of sustainability-related risk and opportunities. These proportionality mechanisms in IFRS S1 are also applicable to IFRS S2. And this is because the requirement in S1 apply to the disclosures of information about sustainability-related risk and opportunities, which include climate-related risk and opportunities. And then the second proportionality mechanism on the right, commensurate with skills, capabilities, and resources available to a company, applies to the disclosure of anticipated financial effect. So for anticipated financial effect, the approach used by a company in preparing disclosures is subject to both proportionality mechanism. This is reflecting that getting information, given its forward-looking nature, and seeking to quantify the effect could both give rise to challenges. Moving to IFRS S2 now, and specific requirement in which proportionality mechanism apply. These include the first mechanism, all reasonable and supportable information available without undue cost or effort, apply in IFRS S2 to a number of requirements. And these include the approach to climate-related scenario analysis in two ways. First, in selecting the approach to climate-related scenario, and second, in selecting the scenario itself, variables, and other input the company uses. This mechanism also applies in relation to the information used in measuring Scope 3 GHG emission, and in preparing disclosures such as the amount and the percentage of asset or business activities vulnerable to climate-related transition risk, climate-related physical risk, and aligned with climate-related opportunities. And then the second proportionality mechanism that is on the right, using an approach commensurate with skills, capabilities, and resources available to a company. This also applies to an approach that a company must take to undertake climate-related scenario analysis to provide information about climate resilience. So what you can see here is that the proportionality mechanism applied to areas that have a pervasive impact on the disclosure provided across the standards, such as identifying the sustainability-related risk and opportunities to report on, and in determining the scope of the value chain. They also apply to specific disclosure requirements that are both in IFRS S1 and S2, such as anticipated financial effect, and they apply to specific disclosure requirements in IFRS S2, such as the approach to scenario analysis as part of the climate resilience disclosure requirement, and in measuring Scope 3 GHG emission.